In August 1983, the new prime minister of a small Caribbean island spoke at Hunter College in Brooklyn, New York. The Reagan administration was pissed and pressed, labeling the prime minister's government as a brutal group of leftist thugs. Maurice Bishop, a 39-year-old with Marxist-Leninist leanings, had big plans for Grenada through his People's Revolutionary Government. Regarding the Monroe Doctrine, he told the crowd, "They like to talk a lot about backyard and front yard and lake. Well, Grenada ain't nobody's backyard and ain't a part of nobody's lake." Just 2 months later, the young leader would be dead. Before his New Jewel Movement party overthrew the previous prime minister in 1979, Grenada had an unemployment rate of 20%, one of the lowest rates of gross domestic product per capita in the region, and widespread poverty. Mind you, this had been after vast improvement by Eric Gary, who in 1951 had led a revolution against the reigning plantocracy. But the island still relied mainly on agricultural exports like sugar, cocoa, banana, and mace, and had a small and ineffective airport that didn't help the poor tourism industry. So, as prime minister, Bishop had rival political parties banned, suspended the constitution, and didn't hold any elections. He also rejected a state monopoly on ownership like in Cuba, instead pursuing a mixed economy with the state sector dominant and in charge of planning. Bishop's goals were to combat poverty, educate the population, improve infrastructure, diversify the economy, build a manufacturing base, and boost tourism. To go about this, Bishop had income tax abolished for 30% of the lowest paid workers. Even while cutting taxes, Bishop raised public spending on programs and infrastructure from 38.7% to 52.7%. Everyone was provided free medical health care, including dental and optical. University scholarships were doled out. School uniforms and books were free. There was a literacy program and a program for teachers to travel to people's homes. Bishop was also a strong ally to Grenadian women, outlawing sexual exploitation of women in exchange for work. Equal pay for equal work was established. And coolest of all, mothers were guaranteed 3 months maternity leave, 2 of which were paid, plus their jobs were held until their return. Grenada established a national transportation service and a marketing and national import board. The Grenada International Airport was well underway by 1983, and like many of Bishop's infrastructure projects, was assisted by Cuban construction workers. Cuba's support also came with defense, as America would have invaded sooner if not for the presence of Cuba's military. Maurice Bishop did a lot of great things for Grenada, especially considering the circumstances. Ultimately, the New Jewel movement would not be able to build a self-sufficiency that would keep it safe from the global economy and the predation of international markets. Basically, it still relied too much on agriculture and exports, which stagnated. Tourism didn't grow because American propaganda targeted the island. Reagan administration was extremely hostile over the international airport and rejected attempts by Maurice Bishop and the People's Revolutionary Government to normalize relations. Because the country received Soviet funds, it was falsely argued by Reaganites that Grenada was just a Soviet plant and not an indigenous revolution. When Grenada supported the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan, the country was further maligned as a puppet state. Unfortunately, the international recession of the early 80s impacted Grenada as well as its communist allies, and by 1983, the revolution was losing popularity. Bishop himself was still popular among the people, but not among those in the New Jewel movement who didn't believe he was radical enough. After Bishop rejected joint leadership with Bernard Cord, he was placed on house arrest, freed by the people, and then assassinated by soldiers on October 19th. In the ensuing chaos, Reagan conveniently enacted Operation Urgent Fury to mobilize Marines for an invasion, claiming that multiple Caribbean nations in the vicinity had requested help and that Cubans were about to occupy the island.
And Cuban ammunition was found, as well as communications equipment. It was all there in such quantities that the Americans believed this to be the makings of a full-scale military base. These are the weapons which Mr. Reagan says turned a friendly island paradise into a Soviet-Cuban colony, being ready to export terror and undermine democracy.
The quick 4-day victory excited Americans who were anti-communist and signaled to skeptics of Reagan's Central American policy that there was more to come, like a possible direct invasion of Nicaragua. Wrote Stephen Kinzer, an orgy of self-congratulation followed the triumph. A total of 8,612 medals were awarded to participants, most of them to desk officers who never came within 1,000 miles of the island. To add legitimacy to its invasion, which even UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher had warned against, the Reagan administration produced a letter allegedly signed by the Governor General Paul Scoon begging for intervention. The rub? The letter had been written in Washington and backdated and delivered to Scoon to sign after the invasion began. By the way, this is how the CIA propagandized the invasion of Grenada. So what other lengths was Reagan willing to go to in the name of American democracy, if not just plain old lying?